morning. It's my honor and privilege to welcome an author, a multifaceted personality. And when I was preparing for this book's, introduction and the author's introduction, I just learned that the author has done everything that needs to be done and studied. He's a political scientist. He's a lawyer. He's a journalist. He has a PhD degree from Princeton University and degrees from Harvard University and the National Law School, Bangalore. His first book, Half Lion, on P.V. Narasimha Rao, was very well received and critically acclaimed. So let me, without further ado, introduce the guest of our PW Dialogue today, Vinay Sitapati. He's the author of JUGALBANDI, the BJP before Modi. Let me show the book to you, the book's cover. So Vinay, welcome to this PW Dialogue. Before we get you to introduce the book and the philosophy and the thought process behind the book, let me ask you, how have been the last 8 months for you personally and professionally?
You mean in terms of COVID?
Yes, the last 8 months have been unusual.
It's been very good, Dr. Batra, because I teach at a university, so we have moved to online teaching. And I would say that, teaching is ultimately like a relationship that, long distance relationship doesn't work. You have to be, the student has to feel you have to feel the student. But that said, given this circumstance, I think we are 80% there. And my sense is that at least in the education world, there's a lot of learning that has happened in COVID. Online world is not going to replace physical teaching, but it will definitely supplement it. And I think that's the big learning for all of us who are, teachers, who are educationists from the last 8 months.
Thank you so much, Vinay. I normally say that PowerPoint presentations are used by people who are neither powerful nor have a point of view. But Vinay Sitapati is an exception to that rule. Let me get Vinay to give you the genesis of the book and a little bit of what's in the book. I've read it over the last few days, and especially today morning, and I couldn't put down the book. It is so fascinating and I could relate to it. So, Vinay, why don't you take us through JUGALBANDI, the BJP before Modi?
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Batra. Just give me a second. Can everybody see this?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so this is my second book on JUGALBANDI. So it's a biography of Vajpayee and Advani. But through this biography, it tells the 100-year history of the BJP before Modi. Because I think today's generation think whether you like Modi or you don't like Modi, you think that life is about Modi. But actually, it's taken 100 years to create Modi from the 1920s. And that's the point of this book. Though, of course, it tells this story through this relationship, this partnership, this JUGALBANDI of the two founders of the BJP. Now, as Dr. Batra mentioned, I have written a book before on P.V. Narasimha Rao, and it was the same style, which is to make footnotes fun. So even in JUGALBANDI, the book that is now out, I have 1800 footnotes. The book has 100 pages just of footnotes, because what I wanted to do, Dr. Batra, is that we are in this post-fact world. I wanted to make sure that the reader and me are on the same page when it comes to facts. We can have difference of opinion. That's good. That's healthy. That's a debate. But I don't want to have different facts. And I wanted the book to be bulletproof. And I learned that from my first book on P.V. Narasimha Rao, which in English is Half Lion. It was published also in the US as an academic book and in multiple languages in India. Now, JUGALBANDI is something we all intuitively know. All Indians know the phrase JUGALBANDI. It comes from a Hindustani or Carnatic classical music. But what JUGALBANDI means is slightly different from a duet. A duet is two people singing the same thing. A JUGALBANDI celebrates difference. So these are two solo performers who don't typically perform together, but they are able to perform together, right? So it's people who you consider musicians very different from each other. You can, now we say fusion, but in Hindustani we say JUGALBANDI. And B, that it's an equal music. You don't know who the soloist, who the accompanist is. So there's no, background musician and front of center musician. They're both in the front. They're both solo musicians. They're both different from each other, and they play very well. And in some sense, the Vajpayee Advani story is that. Now, there's a whole book that I want you to read, and from Dr. Batra's questions, you can get a lot of it. But just to give you a little bit of teaser about why, even if you don't care about politics, you should care about this relationship. Think about it in the following way. You have the relationship between Virat Kohli and MS Dhoni, MS Dhoni was captain, Virat Kohli served under him, right? And then a few years later, MS Dhoni stepped down, Virat Kohli became captain, and MS Dhoni served under him. In India, this is a big deal. In India, we all have egos, even if we join a school or a university, there's a senior, junior, and we don't like to break that. In that context, you have a situation of this partnership where between 1968 and 1986, Vajpayee was boss and Advani served under him. In 1986, the RSS orders Vajpayee to step down as the head of the party. Advani takes over. And from 1986 to 1995, Advani is boss and Vajpayee loyally serves under him. Even when their political marriage is troubled, there is no divorce. And cut to 1995, on the cusp of the BJP coming to power, everybody expects Advani to be the next Prime Minister of India. But you know what? Advani announces Vajpayee as Prime Minister, thinks he's more acceptable to coalition allies. And from 1995 to 2004, Vajpayee is once again boss and Advani serves under him. I can't think of a single political relationship anywhere in the world that had two switches, not just one. And that in some sense is the heart of this book, which is teamwork. The aim of this book is not to convert you to vote for the BJP or to oppose the BJP. That's not the point of the book. So I spent a lot of time actually reducing your blood pressure and temperature in the book. It's not meant to make you angry. But at the heart of it is teamwork. And this is a teamwork that is not just confined to Vajpayee and Advani, but also to many of their partymen, their rivals within the party at that time. The bottom photo is there in the book. It's Vajpayee along with his loyalist Narendra Modi in 1992. So that's how Narendra Modi rises to power. And there's a lot of Narendra Modi and Amit Shah in the book. But as young people making it within Hindu nationalism, once they seize power in 2004, the book ends. And then the book ends with this idea of the new Jugalbandi, which Amit Shah and Modi, and tries to ask, what is the difference between the old and the new Jugalbandi? And to read this book is to get a sense of why the BJP wins. There are so many other parties with the Congress declining in the 1980s. BSP could have come to power. Communists could have come to power. Janata Dal, in fact, did come to power. Why is it that the BJP of all parties has replaced the Congress? And the argument of the book is it's not inevitable. Sab likha hua nahi hai, yet they managed to win. And the larger lesson here is how do you build a team in Indian conditions, right? So even if you're not interested in politics, think about brothers and brothers fighting, in boardroom politics. Think about different factions. Anyone who's worked in India realizes, the ghuspus, the undermining of the leader. This is in our DNA and this is in our blood. In that sense, the Congress party, which is splitting every week, is not a particularly disorganized party. It's an Indian party that gives rise to Indian reactions when it comes to group and team building. In that context, the BJP's success is extraordinary. And that's really the heart of the book. Thanks, Dr. Batra, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you so much, Vinay. First of all, let me congratulate. I have read your first book. I have read your second book, and let me congratulate you on a fine job. I'm one of those people who buys 20 to 50 books a week. I end up reading 3-4, but if I buy books and keep them in my study, I somehow feel that they'll get into my head and make me wiser. That's not been the case, but I can say that I've thoroughly enjoyed reading. And let me ask you, now you gave an analogy of cricket. You gave the example of Dhoni and Virat, right? Now let me take the context to our audience, which is a business audience. A lot of times the fathers start companies and the second generation comes in, the son comes in. And more often than not, the fathers are very real. While there is a Jugalbandi, but there's no switch. And more often than not, the father is very reluctant to pass on the baton too early to the son. More often than not. You can never generalize. So how do you think a Jugalbandi in corporate India between the father and son can be better? What are the lessons they can learn from the Jugalbandi between Vajpayee and Advani?
Well, Dr. Batra, I think that the first lesson that the RSS, which is the mothership of Hindu nationalism, will hold is that father-son duos should not run modern organizations. That's the first big lesson. And let me elaborate this, because the RSS has spent 100 years, or they began in 1925, for nearly 100 years, thinking about the question of family and dynasty, right? So
I read in the book where you talk about two of them are currently, two of them, except two of them, all were married and two were unmarried.
That's right.
And the number one is currently in the RSS hierarchy is the son of the erstwhile one of the leaders who were married. In the book, you say that he suggested that he needed a wife because he needed a wife to look after his ailing mother.
Yes.
And the second one was already married by the time his ascension happened. So clearly I understand where you're going. Keep going.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Which is that, from the beginning itself, the RSS has worried about how do you make Indians work as a team. They draw from this, again, you may not agree with their version of history that Hindus are constantly defeated because they fight with each other in battle. That you can say that that's not historically valid. But the point is that has resulted in an organizational focus on unity. And that's really the heart of the book. Now, the RSS has a very sophisticated view of family. At one level, they like family bonds. They call themselves Sangh Parivar, right? So they like this idea of family, and they understand that family is a very old form of team building in India. So if you want to do team building, you have to mimic this idea of family ties. But the key is it has to be family ties between non-family members. And to give you an example, Dr. Batra Golwalkar, who was the second and most influential leader of the RSS, he had a rule that the frontline functionaries of the RSS, what we call pracharaks, right, should be unmarried. So he felt that they should not be married, that they, because if they are married, what you end up in a situation in which you end up with nepotism, right? They'll have children, then the children will want to join the RSS, etc., etc., etc. So he had like a very strong argument against this, right? But at the same time, as I mentioned in the book, you alluded to that, there were two people who made an exception. One went and told Golwalkar that, look, I'm a full-time functionary of the RSS, but my mother is old, so I need to marry to take care of my mother, right? And then the second person was already married at that time. And today, the number one and number three of the RSS are the children of those two, right? But they will never continue the dynasty because they don't have children, right? Because now the rule is now 100%. That's a very deep point, Dr. Batra, which is that the Congress is not a nepotistic party. It's an Indian party, right? And once you get into this business of father-son, right, the ultimate result is a fight. It's very, very hard in the modern context to, for example, how do you motivate other shareholders, right? How do you motivate other employees? If, at the end of the day, no matter how qualified, how ill-qualified your son is, that person will always, become the head of the corporation. And this is a problem that the Congress party is facing right now.
Okay. Now let me move on, and I'm going to page 301. I'll refer to chapters between it, because you referred to the modern day relationship between Modi and Shah, right? Because you try to kind of explain their relationship and also project it in the future by looking at the past relationship, which may or may not happen. You're not an astrologer, you're not a futurist. Though say you can predict the future by looking at history, because history does repeat itself. But you say on page 301 that Vajpayee was large-hearted enough to allow his own cabinet or party to debate and even criticize his economic policies. He trusted specialists to do their job. In contrast, the man who marketed himself as Mr. Development in Gujarat seems to have contempt for economics as a specialist field, trusts few experts, and is forever balancing economics with political expediency. Few in his cabinet, left alone his party, are encouraged truth to power. On the flip side, Modi seems to have a better feel for welfare schemes and farm sector than the Vajpayee government did. This is perhaps why, in addition to Hindutva, Modi Shah were re-elected in 2019, while Vajpayee Advani lost in 2004. Modi nominees may be bad for the economy, but it seems adept at garnering votes. And if you saw yesterday's election results in Hyderabad, in the municipal election, I've been telling my friends in the politics that South is the next big, focus, and clearly you can see that they've made an impact. So give us a sense, because you study history, you study trends. What is the kind of growth or ascension that Modi-Shah duo are looking at in the South? Because if it needs to, let's say, even hypothetically, say get to 400 numbers, because this duo is very ambitious. They got a certain tally in 2014. They batted the tally to a past 300 mark. They would definitely want to be 350 or 400. And if they suffer some, setbacks in the heartland of North India, they would like to make it up by getting more seats in, say, Tamil Nadu, in Telangana, in Andhra Pradesh. So, what do you think, from your understanding of how you studied them, is there game plan in the South?
Well, Dr. Batra, as you said, look, I'm a political scientist, so I can tell you with extraordinary confidence, what happened in Hindu nationalism from 1920s to today, right? Or to 2004. It's a little harder for me to get into the prediction business because I'm not a journalist, right? So I don't travel. I've not seen those trends. And I think one of the things I've learned as an academic is that you stick to your expertise, right? But that said, the more general point that you made, which is their obsession with winning elections, no matter how small, that's really the heart of the book. I argue in the book that Hindu nationalism itself is created when the British introduced elections in India. It's a limited elections in the 1920s. But just think about it for a second, right? India is a completely group-based society. Our social lives are group-based, right? No Indians like to have lunch alone in a restaurant. In the West, we do it all the time, right? Our social lives, our economic lives are group-based. And suddenly you introduce this principle of political individualism.
Absolutely, you talk about that also in your book. But let me ask you, you alluded to Bengal. Again, we can both hazard a guess and a prediction, but clearly, safe prediction is BJP is looking ahead to a lot of gains. Now, what will be the quantum of those gains? Because at one end, Mamta has been doing polarization of a certain minority. The majority is kind of polarizing against that polarization. And BJP is clearly presenting an alternative. You could see the results in the Lok Sabha elections, though the assembly election and Lok Sabha elections can be very different, as we've seen in the past in many states in many elections. But BJP again is raising the pitch in Bengal so that it benefits. What's your sense of what will happen in Bengal?
Well, Dr. Batra, it's very hard for me to predict the future, but I can tell you a lot about the past, which will help some of your viewers understand the BJP and Bengal better. Firstly, Bengal has historically been a bastion of Hindu nationalism. The great Shama Prasad Mukherjee, founder of Jan Sangh, comes from Bengal. Hegdewar, who founded the RSS, spent time in Bengal. So radical Hindu politics definitely has had a very early space in Bengal, right? We only think about Bengal in terms of communism. That's not true, right? Second is, if you look at the strategy of the BJP in Bengal, it's actually to unite lower castes, right? So one of the points of the book is to tell those who don't like the BJP, don't go on and on about the BJP being an upper caste party exclusively, because that's not true anymore. That its origins were upper caste. The RSS, even today, the Sarsang Chalaks belong to all one community, except I think for one historically. But the social base of the BJP looks more like Narendra Modi, who comes from not just a tea seller family, but an oil presser caste. And if you look at in Bengal, I think the face of the BJP in Bengal is an OBC, right? And the aim is very clearly to associate the Bhadralok upper caste of BJP of Bengal with either the communists or the Trinamool, so that they get the OBC vote. And these are two sides of the coin, which is that the BJP under Modi today is simultaneously exclusionary when it comes to Muslims, right? But progressive when it comes to lower caste Hindus. And in this, it is different from traditional Hinduism. Traditional Hinduism was very hierarchical when it came to caste. Hindu nationalism is a break from that. And traditional Hinduism was very open when it came to other religions and sects. I mean, the apocryphal story of Arab traders landing in Kerala and, they were built a mosque by the local Hindus, right? So that was traditional Hinduism. The Hindu nationalism today of love jihad is very different from that. This is the power of the BJP. It's both progressive as well as regressive. That's why they win. And you can see that in Bengal.
Beautiful. By that, I want to go to another, in your chapter 7 in the section 2 of the book, you say radical Hindus moderate Vajpayee, right? And you could say, just to take the argument from other chapters in the book, moderate Vajpayee, radical Advani. However, today when we deal with Modi,
and I can name him to you offline, but online I can't do it.
Yes, I'm not asking. and then you say that, and Modi is better. He says that Modi is a better actor than Vajpayee. Whereas when it came to Advani, what you saw was what you got, So clearly tell us, here they are dealing with, though Prime Minister Modi in his demeanor and his speeches try to be a statesman, try to appeal to all nationalities, all castes, and be the Prime Minister of a united India. That's how he sometimes comes across. But we know when it comes to the manifesto, when it comes to policies, they are very hardline and they have implemented that agenda. So in the earlier JUGALBANDI, clearly there was a switch. In your book, you make a case. You don't say it very overtly, but you say that it would be hard to imagine Modi ever working below Shah. And clearly, as you talk about in the book, Modi is kind of traversing both the, cadre as well as the parliament, so to say, right? So, does Modi really need a Jugalbandi? That's the question I wanted to ask. Because,
No, I definitely think so. Because, there's a sense now that, look, Modi has destroyed the party. He hasn't. Look, Modi is an individualist. That's his personality. People's personality. I mean, Dr. Batra, you worked in many organizations. The organization has an ethos, and then people who come in have an ethos. And and they're different. And you hope that over time that there is a bit of a mix of the two.
But osmosis. Both learn from each other.
Both learn from each other. So Modi is not a team player. His personality is not a team player, but his movement is 100% team player movement, right? Modi has built a bit of a personality cult around him. And why not? He wins. More people vote for Modi than they vote for a BJP today, right? So, from an electoral standpoint, why not? But at the same time, he has not destroyed the party. So if you look at the politician who I think Narendra Modi is closest to, which is Indira Gandhi at the height of her power split the Congress party, totally removed all the old, the older competitors to her, began to replace chief ministers at will. That was Indira Gandhi. That was what a cult of personality looks like. Whereas Narendra Modi today, yes, he is an individualist. Yes, he has a cult of personality, but he has not severed links with the RSS, right? And there are leaders in the party who are not Modi's chosen people, like Vasundhara Raje Scindia or Shivraj Singh Chauhan, right? Nonetheless, one is the chief minister of one state, and the other one may be back as chief minister in Rajasthan. So Modi has and Amit Shah, even though they have centralized power in the party, they have not cannibalized it. And even today under Modi, the BJP, it's a lot less internally democratic than it was under Vajpayee. But even today, it's more democratic than the Congress is today, right? And that tells you that even a personality like Modi, who is a lone wolf, right, has been socialized into teamwork by the ideology that he belongs to.
And the ideology works for him and for the party. So in some way, they're kind of contributing to each other. Now, there were Lotus Wars. You talk about the Lotus Wars in the party, You also talk about how Pramod Mahajan's going cleared the way for Modi, so to say. There was a vacuum and Modi, came in, right? Now, tell us, of course, there are very many theories about Modi, Of course, he is the Prime Minister for the next 4 years at least. And then there's a theory that with the current state of the Congress and the current state of the opposition, possibly he'll win a third term. You can only say these things closer to the election, but today his popularity is unprecedented, right? Also, what helps him is the disarray and lack of leadership and lack of acceptance of a leader by the masses from the Congress party. So give us a sense of, again, I'm not asking you to make a prediction. Of course, there is the Ram Mandir may be built in 2022 or 2023, and that itself may help what you call the 100 years of, the saffronization, so to say, or the 100 years of Hindutva philosophy that has led the, creation of BJP and the BJP and Narendra Modi coming to power. So clearly, what is the future that you see over the next 6 to 12 years? I mean, I know I'm talking to you.
I think a lot of readers will like is the specter of Narendra Modi, which is the sudden and astonishing rise of Narendra Modi from late 2001. in a situation where in just 1 year after he wins the December 2002 election, he is Hindu Hriday Samrat. And that's the beginning of the end of Vajpayee and Advani. The writing is on the wall. It's a movement based on teamwork. So it's not suddenly Advani and Vajpayee will be removed from office. It isn't like that. It takes a while, but it's pretty clear that the Modi and Amit Shah are at ascent. And it's a complicated story because I spend a lot of time showing that it was very, very easy for Modi's career to have ended on that day. Very easy, right? He was a nobody. He had never held government position. So I think that's the chapter which readers will like, which is the spectacular and sudden rise of Narendra Modi. And there are lots of original material there. People have spoken to, who've spoken to nobody on that. And the fight between Vajpayee and Advani on whether you should sack Modi or not, because that becomes the thorn between them. But the chapter that I enjoyed the most was I would say the chapter called Hindu Fevicol, which is from the 1920s to the 1940s. So it's a historic chapter. So my challenge was, how do you put enough masala and interest in a chapter that is fundamentally historic? But literally, if you're building a house, the foundation has to be strong. So that's the foundation of the BJP. So I couldn't not tell the reader that. So that I would say I spent a lot of time being both accurate, right, being deep, as well as being fun in material that is not that easy. Whereas for Narendra Modi, and Vajpayee and Advani fighting over Modi, that is a story that just tells itself, right?
Thank you so much. I agree. I love the Hindu Fevicol. I love the term, and I love the chapter. And I can tell you that anybody who wants to make a sense of the future must read the book. I also remember, I don't remember the chapter, but you talk about how when Gujarat, the BJP came to power and a certain chief minister was made, and the one that went out of power insisted that Narendra Modi be taken away from Gujarat.
Yes.
So, Keshubhai Patel was being advised by Narendra Modi, and
that's right.
Shankar Singh Vadela's only request was that please get Modi out of the state. Yeah. And that's how he came to Delhi, and he went around, and that's how he was able to become a even wiser person. From state politics, he went into national politics. So I keep saying every rejection means redirection, and redirection can lead you to any heights. So that's a beautiful example. Now I want to, since you're a political analyst and you're a student of politics and history, what do you make of Biden's victory in the American elections? And specifically, in your sense, how does the dynamics between India and US change, or will it not change? Because, a lot of commentary was that, Democrats are not good for India. Biden and Harris they have very strong views on Kashmir, and they are not good for India. So what is your commentary? Because you studied there, you have ties with the West, and you're a student, apart from being a professor, you're a student of history and politics. What do you think will be the impact of a new, leadership from the Democratic Party in the US on Indian US elections?
Well, Dr. Batra, if I can go back to my book once again, I have a chapter called Making India Great Again, which spends a lot of time on the Vajpayee government's foreign and economic policy, and front of center of that is the relationship with the United States. That's the front of center. And the argument of that book, I think, still holds today, which is that from 1947 all the way to 1991, we had the Nehruvian consensus in Parliament. And that Nehruvian consensus had a certain view of the United States, right? Now, after 91, we have what I like to call the Narasimha Rao consensus. And that consensus is a far more open and friendly relationship with the United States. And the United States has responded. In fact, the prime minister who sort of made the break most visually, as I point out, was Bill Clinton in his 2000 visit to India. He goes to Parliament, then he also goes to Hyderabad. He goes to, I think, Cyber City or Cyber Hub in Hyderabad. So, in that sense, I would say that the shifting relationship between United States and India is bipartisan. To put you the other side of that coin, Dr. Batra, I think Manmohan Singh and Narendra Modi, there hasn't been that much difference in the attitude towards the United States. So even on our side, BJP, Congress, it's bipartisan. Now, I think the two real questions when it comes to Biden is how tough he's going to be on China. So I think that because Trump was tough, right? You can say that he didn't follow his words with deeds, etc., but he was tough, right? And he had a certain, for a man who in many respects is immoral, he had a certain moral clarity when it came to China. The question is, will the Democrats continue that? And that matters.
And Biden is seen to be soft on China.
That's the worry.
In lots of articles, he's seen to be a China man.
Yeah.
So to say, somebody who's a China acolyte, who will now run America. So you're right. And the second point?
Second point is on Kashmir and on human rights in India. maybe certainly the Democrat constituency, the voters for the Democratic Party would like this. But I don't think in America there's an appetite for, America's position in the world is not what it was, during the heyday of the Clinton period. So I don't think they have an appetite to carry through with it. And certainly of all the prime ministers and governments India has had, this is the least likely to bend to Western pressure, right? I think Nehru and Indira Gandhi used to read the Times of London. They used to read the New York Times. I think they cared. I think both Narendra Modi and Amit Shah wear it as a badge of pride that, that they are able to attack liberal or left liberal sentiments in the West. So I don't see that having a big difference. So the short point, Dr. Batra, and this is again not my terrain. Let me be clear to the readers that when I know something as much of the readers, I want to tell you that, and this is one of that, is that there isn't going to be a fundamental shift that way or this way,
Okay. Before I let you go, Vinay, is there a playbook? You've written your second book, you're a professor. Is there a playbook to writing a book every now and then? This is your second book in 3 years, right?
Yes, that's right. Well, I think that two things. One is, look, if you're writing a book, figure out what question or what puzzle the book wants to answer. If you already know the answer to a book, then it becomes really boring to write it. So, pick firstly, I think there are two reasons to do that. One is that it motivates you because you're trying to figure out what happened. So I genuinely came into this book with asking the question, why does the BJP win, right? Why? And a lot of the existing explanations I was not satisfied by. So I think the scholar in me was looking for a puzzle. And if you don't have a deep puzzle that you believe in, if you already fix the match in that you already know what you're going to say at the end of it, then it's hard to motivate yourself. Because all this sounds fun, for me to chat with Dr. Batra on Businessworld, it's fun, but it's that half an hour or 45 minutes of fun is on the back of 3 years of really boring work, right? So unless you have a fire that, look, I don't know something, and can this book help answer that? That I think is very hard to sustain. There's a second reason, Dr. Batra, the readers can smell it. So the other thing I'm obsessed about, which is why, Halfline, even though my Narasimha Rao book is a quote-unquote academic book, it was a bestseller, right? And the numbers on Jugalbandi is already on the way to being a bestseller, even though as you've read it, it's a quote-unquote heavy book in the sense it's quite scholarly. But I think I try to balance that by trying to make footnotes fun, but also to obsess about the reader, right? Like for me, the point of writing a book is to tell the reader something, to have a conversation with the reader. And it's like any other relationship. I have biases, right? Let the reader know that, but don't try to fool the reader. Don't try to talk down to the reader. And readers smell that very quickly, Dr. Batra. And Dr. Batra, the reader of my book has the single biggest power over me, which is that from doing this and reading the book, the reader can do this and say bye, that's power, right? And I'm constantly aware that each paragraph should lead to the next paragraph. At the end of a chapter, I'm sure many of your readers have read Hardy Boys, etc. It's genius that, the two Hardy Boys are stuck there. What is going to happen next, right? So that forces you to go to the next chapter. So I spend a lot of time thinking about that because I know the subject matter is a bit dense. So as somebody who's also a teacher, it is my duty, it is my dharma, not the reader's dharma, that if I have to give bitter medicine, I should put a little bit of honey, a little bit of tadka, a little bit of masala. That's my job. So I think this is what keeps me motivated, an obsession with treating the reader with respect and picking on puzzles to which I don't know the answer. Like even with the Narasimha Rao book, I wrote the book because I'm a child of liberalization. I'm 37 now. So I was a young kid in the 1990s. I remember the first McDonald's coming, in Bandra where I lived. And my father moved from a PSU job to a private sector job. So that obsessed me. It says, look, I need to find out what happened. What was the shift? But I didn't know the answer to that. So any aspiring researchers, book writers, don't fix the match before you start writing. Don't do it because the reader smells it very quickly. And you feel disgusted to yourself,
Thank you, Vinay. I've thoroughly enjoyed having a conversation, and I'll possibly engage with you more often. I just want to let you go by asking you, what should we expect your third book to be on?
I don't know.
Will it be on how the Congress can be revived, or the decline of Congress, or what's happening to regional parties? And, we look forward to your third book, whatever it would be on. We wish you luck, and I have no doubt that people who want to make sense of what's happening right now and why it's happening and what is likely to happen in future and are interested in the future of this country will read your book. So we wish you luck, and it's been thoroughly enjoyable reading the book and having a conversation with you. For those of you who missed it, please find Vinay Sitapati's interview on the YouTube channel of Businessworld and read the review and the interview in the next issue of Businessworld. Thank you so much, Vinay. We wish you luck. God bless you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It's really been a pleasure. Thank you.